In the United States, there they are. Education, like in Australia, belongs constitutionally to the states, not to the federal government. And therefore, developing national standards involve each state separately agreeing to the standards. So we had to develop these common standards facing the job of presenting them to each state, for each state to go through its own political process, its own legal process in adopting them. So that set the stage for the way that we work. This is a map of the green states, or the states who are currently using the Common Core standards. They're part of the Common Core. The orange states are states that have never been part of the Common Core. And the gray states are flickering in and out. So, for example, Indiana dropped out of the Common Core for political reasons and adopted its own standards, which were nearly identical to the Common Core. So even in the gray states, it's still the Common Core, but without the brand name. So in this sense, we've been successful. And this was a great surprise to everyone, including us. So what was the process that we used? One of the unusual things about the way we worked, and a way that distinguished the way we work from the way state standards had been developed in the past, is that we separated the political process and the writing process. And we did that because part of the agenda, part of the promises we made to the states before we even started, was that we were going to base these standards on evidence, not on politics, and we were going to design a tool to solve an educational problem, not a political problem. And yet we had to do the political work. And so we had a team that organized the political work all along the way. They were dedicated to that work, and we had separate teams doing the writing, and then we had planned ways of the two interacting. And we did it over and over again. So when we organized the work, we had to define what was the educational problem that Common Core standards were supposed to solve. And in mathematics, based on the research, the main problem was that the state standards in the US and the state curriculum was sprawling, had way too much in it, and it was incoherent, mathematically incoherent and pedagogically incoherent. So our job was to produce something that had less in it, but at the same time had more depth and coherence. That's not the kind of work a committee can do. And I'll show you some examples. Because it takes so much analysis and design and intricate decision making. But it's also not something you want to leave to some very smart individuals. It's something you want a committee to oversee and interact. So designing the process turns out to be mean a lot and be very tricky. So we wrote a draft. And before we were finished writing the draft, when we had something that wasn't very good, the political team said, we are going to put this out for comment. And we said, no, it's not ready. And they said, we want to put it out before it's ready. It's a mistake to put it out in public when it's too late to change very much. It's a mistake to put it out in public when it looks finished. We want it to look like it's at the beginning. And so the only way to make sure that happens is we're going to do it at the beginning. And as writers, we were saying, no, we just started. There's contradictions, there's mess, there's unfinished parts. They said, perfect. And they put it out to all the states. And the committee in each state organized teachers and stakeholders into a state team. And then we went to those meetings and we heard from each state. It was organized so it was efficient. And they all said, it's awful. And we said, oh, we know it's awful, we're sorry, but the input they gave us turned out to be very useful. It was much better input than you would get if you just asked them to fill in what should we do with a blank piece of paper, or if you gave them something that when they looked at it, they said, well, this can't change. It was terrific input. And the best part was when we came out with the next draft, we had more time, it was much better and everything else. Everybody said, look, they listened. It's a miracle. And it's true, we did listen. But as we were going through this process, and we did that more than twice, iterate, do it more, not less. Send the imperfect out there, get the input. Eventually, there was so much input, we didn't have time to digest it. But nobody knew that. We also, as a writing team, came across issues. For example, we had the issue of how to treat statistics. The mathematicians had a particular view on how we should do that based on a rigorous treatment of probability theory. And the statisticians had a very different view. They said, it's an empirical science about inference for answering questions with data. And we asked we had committees. We asked the committee of the mathematicians, a committee of the statisticians, write a proposal for how it would look in the curriculum. So each one wrote a different proposal. And we could see their proposals, which were fairly full of what the progression would be through the curriculum. And it didn't take very long to see that the mathematicians' plan was improbable and wouldn't work. Even the mathematicians, almost all of them, not all of them, had to admit it would be too difficult. And so we went with the statisticians' way of doing it. Now notice in that story, what we didn't do is compromise. Compromise is a bad design principle. If you're designing something good, compromise is not how you do it. If there are two different views of how to do something, in that case we chose one. In other cases, when there were two different views and fierce arguments, we came up with something fresh that was neither. Because our experience was when those arguments existed, both sides were right and both sides were wrong. Both sides had very astute criticisms of the other side. They were both right about what was wrong with the other guy. And they both had some very important insight and very good value that they were passionate about. But both of them, the argument had distorted both of their thinking, and they were both presenting something too extreme. And we could see that if you picked either one, it wouldn't be a good design. But also, if you pick a winner, you're organizing the opposition, and they're going to be attacking the standards. So our inclination was to look for something fresh that nobody has seen before, rather than to look for a compromise. And most of the time, it worked. Something fresh appealed to most of the people on both sides. There was still an extreme and an extreme, but most joined the fun. And so going through this process, honestly, even our final draft, we still had a to-do list of things to do. But our final draft was good enough. And you have the same problem we had. You have a one-year timeline. That's basically what we had. And all we had to get to was good enough. We didn't have to get to perfect. And we didn't get to perfect. But we got to good enough. And we got to the point where people would say, and especially teachers said, this is good enough to stand on. This is enough to go with. We need Common Core standards. This will work. Let's figure out how to make it work. We can fix the little broken things as we go. And that's where you want to get to. And so in some ways, this unrealistic timeline is a blessing. Your work will be done in a year no matter what. And then you can, so aim for good enough, don't aim for perfect. Our work as writers and our work as the governing group that worked the politics, we did have some conflicts. And when we listened to each other, one of our conflicts, for example, is we were writing the standards so that the mathematics was plain. We were speaking directly about the mathematics. And when you speak directly about the mathematics, you're speaking about concepts. And we were speaking to teachers. We were writing it for teachers. And we were telling teachers what it was the students should understand. In other words, what was the knowledge inside the student's head? And the states were telling us, their committees, no, you should be writing, how would we know if they knew it? How would we observe it? How would we test it? How would we assess it? And we realized that their practice, their tradition, was writing standards for tests so you could test students. And we refused. We said, no, that's wrong. There are only 300 people making tests. There are 3 million teaching. We're going to write to teachers in language they understand. And so that's what we did. So during this process, we already did that. We were getting input from different sources. Our governance came from the National Association of Governors and the National Association of Chief State School Officers. If you know anything about our politics, the majority of both groups were Republicans. And when we started, they were mostly towards center Republicans. Nowadays, they're more to the right. The president was a Democrat. When we were done, the governors and the president both embraced the Common Core standards. And that had a lot to do with why it has its opposition politically now, but it's standing up. We also took systematic input from all the agencies, the states, the districts, and so on. It was organized and it was systematic. But we also took input from national organizations and the public. So we used the web for anybody in the public could give us input. But we also, the teachers' organizations, the teachers of mathematics, the teachers' unions, every organization we made direct contact with and asked them to organize a process to give us input from their members. And by having those organizations organize their own process, it saved us a lot of work. And the input we were getting wasn't just random from people, it was more organized into categories. Often it had been edited and so on, so it was easier for us to digest. And when we were responsive, we had whole organizations coming over to support the standards. So we wanted to, this was our charge. Solve the educational problems, not the political ones. Base it on evidence, not on politics. Design a useful tool for teachers, not a declaration of agreement. Let me just pause on that one for a second. My previous experience working on standards in states, and I had worked in 3 or 4 states, always was the same. It was to form committees like yours, organize them and bring them into rooms for 3 days like this, have poster paper around the room, people take turns making speeches, staff from the agency writes it down on the poster paper. If there's lots of speeches, it doesn't matter because there's lots of poster paper. If people disagree, it doesn't matter, lots of poster paper. When the arguments start happening and something has to be done, somebody comes up with clever language which embraces both points of view. Well, it turns out that that clever language makes the standards vague exactly when teachers need them to be clear and precise. And where their standards are clear and precise, which is where everybody agrees, it doesn't really matter that much because the teachers already know that. So you're producing a perverse document. and the document will have too much in it. It'll have too much in it because writing, it doesn't matter how much you put on the poster paper. And it's easier to reach a political agreement if everybody gets what they want. And what you get is a something for everybody designed to be popular in a political sense. It's an awful educational tool. So as a writing team, you don't want to do it that way. You want to take the craft of writing, the technical challenge of producing a useful tool seriously by always thinking of the teacher. And I want to get to, I'm running out of time, but before I run out of time, oops. Oh, it's hard to, there. I can count the bullets. I should have made every one different. High-level management needs tools. They can be derived from the teacher's tools, and they should be derived from the teacher's tools. The public needs tools. They should be derived from the teacher tools. The assessment people need tools. They should be derived from the teacher tools. It's the teachers and students where the reality is. That's reality. Everything should be invested in making it work there. If it works there, these standards will stand for a long time. If it doesn't work there, the teachers will complain, the parents will hear the complaints, and they won't last. And teachers in all their variety. Okay, so one of the arguments we had was how much of the mathematics should be about fluency and remembering the math facts and so on. We knew that some of it should be that way, but not all of it should be that way. So the critical thing was to be very clear and definite about what the balance was. And so in the end, we identified less than 15 different fluencies in the whole curriculum. And we said exactly what they were, and we went to the people who cared most about fluency to help us write those. We didn't go to the critics of fluency, ask them to help us write those. Then that took care of the fluency, and then we moved into deeper understanding and the practicalities of mathematics, and above all, what we call the mathematical practices. The mathematical practices are what you're calling competencies. They're things like be able to construct a valid argument and critique the arguments of others, make sense of problems, and persist in solving them. They're character issues and mathematical expertise issues rather than simple content issues. I see. This. These are some things we didn't finish because of time and things that standards need. And I advise you to plan to do these, even if you have to do them after the 1 year is up. The standards have to live for 10 years, not 1 year. And number one is examples of student assignments. This should be in every subject, not just mathematics. For every standard, for clusters of standards, for domains. And examples drawn from multiple places, not just Brazil. These examples are what teachers really find useful. They read the words, but it's the examples that really show them what to expect. And many teachers can share them. So we're just now in that work. I hope you have more invested and more time than I do. I'm used to running out of time. Everyone who works on standards is. One of the things we've learned during implementation is that people, from teachers on up, testing people, principals, teachers, pay attention to whatever you put a number on. If you number it, then that's what they pay attention to. If it's not numbered, it's just considered part of the prologue, the context, and it's soon forgotten. So if it's important, put a number on it. And if it's just the detail about something else, don't put a number on it. Put the number on the something else that it's about. So one of the things I would do over again, this is what we did. We had domains, things like fractions, measurement, and geometry. And then in the domains, we had clusters. And within clusters, we'd have 4 or 5 standards. So we had about 10 clusters per grade level. Here's what we should have done. We should have made the clusters into standards. It's perfect to have 10 standards per grade level. And all the other detail should be subtopics underneath those 10 standards. So the standard should be fractions and then describe what the purpose, what they're supposed to learn about fractions, and then you itemize whatever details you want. The grain size at which it translates into reality for teachers is chapters or units, not stray little fragments. This helps you emphasize the depth and coherence. So we did that with the clusters, but we're finding the clusters ignored because that's not what we numbered. So whatever you care most about, number it, and don't be tempted to number the smallest grain size. A lot of people will want you to do that. Number at the level of generality where the power is, and that's going to be about 10 per grade level. All right. So we don't want the long lists of vague statements. We don't want mysterious. We don't want to tell teachers that their job is to cover topics. That isn't the teacher's job. The job is to teach students. And if your list is too long, it makes it seem like their job is to cover students. Cover topics. Standards are a promise. To students, do your assigned work, and we promise this is what you'll learn. If you learn this, we promise you'll have good opportunities for careers in college. To parents, we promise to teach your kids this. To college and employers, this is what our graduates will know and can do. And to teachers, teach this, and you will have done your job well. When you're writing the standards and thinking about what needs to be said and what can be left out, think about these promises. So, traditionally, this will have to be my last point. We organize the curriculum into these categories. And you'll see this globally. When we thought about coherence, we broke number down into, this was the traditional, and it was K-12. But this is the way we did it. We broke number down into operations and algebraic thinking, number in base 10, and fractions. Each of those is a coherent mathematical topic. And we developed them over grade levels. Those are the grade levels on the bottom. And they fed into algebra. This isn't the whole standards, but this is the heart and soul of how arithmetic feeds into algebra. If you go back to the traditional way, it's not visible. The coherence work also operated at a level of detail. These, I know you can't see them. This is a flow chart of the standards from kindergarten through 8th grade. I'll give you a close-up. Each box is a standard. The green lines connect back to standards on which that standard depends. The black lines extend forward to standards which depend on it. So we had this flow chart from about the middle draft. And every time we moved a topic, we would have to change the flow chart and look at every single arrow and see that it still worked. This is not the kind of work, and notice, by the way, how those 5th grade standards over there depend on 3rd grade standards, 4th grade standards, and also some of them on 5th grade standards. This is how we kept it coherent. And when we found a box that was kind of isolated, we really said, maybe we should drop it. If we remove this brick, the building won't fall. And when we saw a standard with too many arrows hitting in it, it made us wonder, wait a minute, maybe we should blow this up and stretch it out, get more time spent on it. This kind of analytic work, this is what I was talking about, cannot be done by a committee meeting for 3 days. This is the kind of work that you need 2 or 3 people working on every day over a period of time. And what I worry about in your process, is it adequately staffed with people with substantive knowledge to do this kind of work? This is what kept us from making it incoherent. And there's a lot of work like this. But, okay, so I'm going to stop with that only because time's up. These were the fluencies, just so you can see them. And these are the mathematical practices. And I see we didn't. One thing about these is these mathematical practices describe the actions of students, not the actions of teachers, but they have direct implication for the actions of teachers. And we numbered these. And these have really taken and gripped the teachers really love these and feel that these have changed the definition of their job in teaching mathematics, from just covering topics to developing human beings into mathematical experts and thinkers. We got these, by the way, by looking at work from Denmark, Singapore, Australia, and some work from the United States. So I concur with my colleagues, look everywhere in the world at the beginning of your work and as you go forward. All right, I'm going to stop. Thank you very much.